Welcome to the Immersion Zone. Today we're diving into the social, economic, and environmental costs of dive tourism in island communities by looking at a series of research papers by Zahida Afrin-Nisa and her colleagues. As scuba divers, when we go to tropical islands, we see a paradise. But can we ensure we are not making it hell for the local population? How does dive tourism fit into a sustainable blue economy of small island nations currently facing serious social, economic, and environmental threats?
All right, so imagine you're scuba diving, right? And you're just floating there weightlessly, looking out at this amazing coral reef,
Oh, yeah.
just bursting with colors and life, like tiny fish darting in and out. Maybe a sea turtle swims by. It's like a whole other world down there. And for so many scuba divers, these incredible underwater scenes, they're what draws them to these far-flung islands.
Totally. Like, it's not just a vacation for divers, it's
Yeah.
more like almost like a pilgrimage to see these unique and fragile ecosystems.
Exactly. And, for a lot of these islands, we're talking about small island developing states or SIDs. These amazing underwater environments are really like essential to who they are and how their economies function.
Yeah, absolutely crucial.
So on that note, welcome to another deep dive. We're so glad to have you with us today.
Yeah, this is fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and today we're going to be really focusing on the work of Zahida Afrinisa and her colleagues, looking at this really important connection between, the super popular scuba diving tourism and the economic well-being of these really special island nations. So our mission today is to really get a handle on how these islands can benefit more directly from all the tourism revenue generated from their awesome underwater experiences.
Exactly, yeah. I mean, it's something that Zahida Afrin-Nisa and her colleagues really highlight, this idea that for a lot of these SIs, they're exclusive economic zones. Exactly. And just a reminder, those are the areas of the ocean that extend 200 nautical miles from a country's coastline where they have special rights to manage those marine resources.
Yeah, it's their little slice of the ocean, so to speak.
They're often way more significant, like geographically, than their actual land area.
Wow.
It's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
Yeah, I mean, it really is like a whole different way of thinking about their territory.
It really is, yeah. And collectively, all these sites, they control something like 30% of all the oceans and seas on the planet.
30%.
Yeah, that's a huge oceanic footprint.
That's a big chunk of the ocean.
It is. It is.
So, considering all that, this vast marine territory, and the fact that scuba diving is such a huge draw for tourists, our big question for this deep dive is, how can these island nations make sure that, a bigger share of that money that tourists are spending, actually stays within their economies, strengthening what's called their blue economy.
Right, right.
And for anyone who maybe hasn't heard that term before, the blue economy, it's basically all the different economic activities that are, related to the ocean. So we're talking like fishing, tourism, renewable energy, anything that has to do with the sea. It's all encompassing. And to really wrap our heads around the potential impact here, well, before the COVID-19 pandemic hit, global tourism revenue linked to just coral reefs alone, well, it was estimated to be around US $36 billion
Per year.
every single year. Yeah.
$36 billion, that's a huge amount of money. So where does scuba diving fit into this big economic engine?
Well, along with snorkeling and just the general enjoyment of those amazing underwater seascapes, scuba diving is a major driver when it comes to creating jobs in the marine tourism sector,
Right.
especially in these tropical island regions. And actually in a lot of these SIDs, marine tourism and the industries that sort of prop it up, they can contribute something like 20% to 50% of their total gross domestic product.
GDP.
Exactly, their GDP. And, we're not just talking like a handful of jobs. It often makes up over 30% of all their employment opportunities.
So it's not just a niche thing for these islands then. It sounds like it's a pretty big part of their economic backbone. I mean, it's a significant economic engine for a lot of them. And a lot of these islands, they really lean into this. They promote themselves as like high-end dive destinations to try and attract, a more affluent tourist crowd.
Yeah, for sure.
And, this whole idea of recognizing the value of their reefs, it's not exactly a new thing. Back in 2017, a bunch of SIDs, places like Fiji, Grenada, Palau, and the Seychelles, they all signed something called the Coral Reef Life Declaration.
I've never heard of that.
It was a big deal at the time, kind of a political statement that acknowledge the huge economic, social, ecological, and cultural value of, what healthy coral reefs provide.
So that makes a lot of sense. I mean, if your livelihood depends on healthy coral reefs, you'd want to protect them, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So, if scuba diving tourism is like such a big moneymaker for these islands, what's the issue? Why are we talking about making sure more of the revenue stays local?
That's the million-dollar question.
Right.
Right. And that's where the work of Zahida Afrin-Nisa and her colleagues, it really provides some key insights. Because, while the potential for economic benefit is like super obvious,
Right.
they point out that a lot of the specifics about how the scuba diving industry actually works, things like how divers are educated and trained, what the local job market actually looks like, what kind of labor conditions are in place, the safety regulations that are there,
Right.
and even just how the diving sector connects with other parts of the island's economies.
Yeah.
All this stuff, it's often not fully grasped by the policymakers in those SIDs.
Oh, so there's a disconnect then between like the people making the decisions and the people actually working in the industry.
Yeah, it's like they get the big picture, right? That reefs are valuable, tourism is good, but the nuts and bolts of how the industry actually operates, maybe not so much.
Because that's where the idea of revenue leakage comes in, right?
Exactly. So revenue leakage basically means that a big chunk of the economic benefits from, all this scuba diving tourism, it's not actually staying in the island nations, it's flowing out of the local economy.
Okay, so the money is like literally leaving the islands.
Pretty much, yeah.
So where's it going?
Well, a big factor is the role of these like big external corporations, specifically large international dive training agencies.
Okay, so like the organizations that certify divers.
Exactly. You've probably heard of some of the big ones, like the Professional Association of Dive Instructors, or PADI.
Oh yeah, KD for sure.
Yeah, these are like globally recognized organizations, and their dive certification courses, they often even like get you university credit or some kind of professional recognition in a lot of developed countries, like the US, Australia, Canada, places like that.
Yeah, I mean, those certifications they're pretty much essential if you want to dive anywhere in the world.
Right, yeah.
But what's the downside for the economies of these island nations?
Well, here's the thing. While these international agencies are like, crucial for maintaining those standards and, attracting divers in the first place,
Right.
the money that flows from those certifications, the training materials, the membership fees, well, a lot of it ends up disproportionately benefiting those big external entities rather than the local island economies. So you might have, local dive operators conducting the courses, but a big chunk of the revenue generated, it ends up flowing back to those international headquarters.
Oh, so it's like buying a souvenir from a local artisan, but then finding out that most of the money actually goes to a big corporation.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. You're participating in the activity locally, but a lot of the financial benefit, it doesn't stick around.
So it's like a drain on the local economy then.
Exactly. And this is a big reason why Zahida Afrin-Nisa and her colleagues, they emphasize that for these SIDs to really achieve like truly sustainable economic development from all this, there needs to be some real innovation in how science, government policies, local industries, the private sector, how all those things interact in the marine space.
Okay, so it's about making sure the money stays where it's actually generated.
Exactly. Plug that leak, so to speak.
Right. So if a key part of the solution is like making sure that the money that divers spend actually stays within those island economies, what does that look like in practice? Like, how do you keep that money there?
Well, retaining more of that revenue can be like a really crucial source of funds for investment in the blue economy of these nations.
Okay, so what does that mean? Like, what kind of investments?
So think about it this way. That money could be used to develop a skilled local blue workforce.
A blue workforce.
Yeah. So this means like investing in training programs for local people to become marine scientists, so they can monitor the health of those reefs, and also to train local dive professionals.
So like dive instructors, guides, all that.
Exactly. And that way you're creating jobs that stay in the community and help protect the environment at the same time.
That's cool, yeah.
And it doesn't stop there, right? It also means strengthening the national infrastructure to support these marine-based industries. So things like, improving harbors and dive centers, building marine research facilities.
So like building from the ground up.
Pretty much, yeah. And it goes beyond just the diving industry itself.
Yeah.
This reinvestment could also fund like the implementation and enforcement of marine conservation policies. Because, I mean, if you're going to have a dive industry, you need to protect what people are coming to see, right?
Makes sense, yeah.
So it's about, supporting sustainable fishing practices, doing aquaculture, enhancing like marine research capabilities,
Yeah.
Even things like adopting new technologies for monitoring and managing the ocean.
It's like a whole system then.
It is, yeah. It's
Yeah.
about creating this comprehensive and sustainable ocean-based economy.
So reinvesting in their natural assets and making sure that the local people are the ones who benefit.
Exactly, yeah.
Now, I also noticed that the research mentions something called the Science Policy Interface, or SPI.
Yeah, the SPI.
So what exactly is that, and how does it relate to this whole challenge?
So the SPI, it's basically the bridge between like scientific knowledge and what policymakers actually decide to do.
Okay.
It's supposed to ensure that when governments are making policies or deciding where to invest their money, they're using the best available science to guide those decisions, especially when it comes to complex issues like the health of coral reefs and how to make them more resilient.
Right. So it's like a pipeline connecting like what scientists know to what governments actually do.
Yeah, that's the idea. Anyway,
Okay.
but Zahida Afranisa and her colleagues, they point out that there are like some serious gaps and weaknesses in this SPI, especially when you look at it from the perspective of the global south. And, one of their main points is that it doesn't really incorporate industrial policy.
Industrial policy.
Yeah, so industrial policy, it's basically the strategies that governments use to like develop specific sectors of the economy.
Okay. So how does that tie into like the science of coral reefs and the policies that are supposed to protect them?
Well, see, the argument that Zahida Afranisa and her colleagues are making is that without a policy framework that really integrates industrial policy within like the UN's SPI, island governments are kind of stuck because they might have the scientific knowledge about what needs to be done to protect their reefs.
Right. They know what the problem is.
But they don't necessarily have the financial resources or the policy tools to actually do it.
Oh, so they can't act on the science because they don't have the support to put those actions into place.
Exactly. So it's like they know what they should be doing, but they can't actually afford to do it.
I see. And is that where the small island developing states technical assistance strategy for industrial policy comes in?
Yeah, that's one potential solution. It's basically a way for island policymakers to try and link up the Sustainable Development Goals.
SDGs.
Right, the SDGs. Specifically, the ones that are most relevant to their marine industries. So like SDG 9, that's about industry, innovation, and infrastructure.
Right.
But also connecting that with goals about decent work and economic growth.
Yeah.
So that's SDG 8. And also like the goals around conserving and sustainably using the ocean. That's SDG 14.
Okay, so it's all about making those connections, making sure those goals are working together.
Exactly, yeah. It's not just about protecting the environment or just about economic growth. It's about finding ways to do both at the same time.
And this is where a thriving scuba diving industry that actually benefits local communities, really comes into play, right? Like, how does that actually help achieve these broader global goals, the SDGs?
Yeah, well, a locally prosperous scuba diving industry can really contribute to a number of different SDGs. So, take SDG 8, for example, which is all about, sustainable economic growth, full employment, decent work for all. If these islands can ensure fair labor practices and create more well-paying jobs in the dive sector, so, not just for the dive instructors and the boat captains, but also for like the marine conservationists and the tourism operators, they can actually make some real progress towards that goal.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then, there's SDG 14, which is all about life below water, right?
Yeah.
A healthy dive industry, it really depends on healthy coral reefs and healthy marine ecosystems. So when local communities are like really invested in the success of that industry, they're also going to be more likely to protect those resources.
So it's in their best interest to keep things sustainable.
Exactly.
Well, yeah.
And then finally, there's SDG 9, which is about industry, innovation, and infrastructure. And when you invest in local dive infrastructure, training facilities, marine research capabilities, that directly contributes to building that kind of resilient infrastructure, promoting sustainable industrialization, and fostering innovation.
So it's like a win-win-win.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
Healthy reefs attract divers, the local industry benefits, and then that prosperity actually supports conservation efforts. It's a positive cycle.
It really is. And speaking of positive things, Zahida Afranisa and her colleagues, they actually highlight SDG target 14.7 specifically, which, for everyone listening, that target basically calls for an increase in the economic benefits to SIDs and least developed countries from the sustainable use of marine resources.
Right.
And, tourism is like right there in the target, including scuba diving.
Yeah, so it's really clear that, the global community recognizes how important it is to get this right.
Okay, yeah. Now, all this sounds great, but are there any specific challenges that SIDs often face when they're trying to actually achieve these benefits? Make sure that local people are the ones who are benefiting?
Oh, yeah, there are definitely some hurdles. One of the big ones, and Zahida Afran-Nisa and her colleagues talk about this, is that SIDs often have limitations in their skilled labor force. So this means that they have to rely a lot on expatriate workers.
People from other countries?
Yeah, even within the tourism and the dive industry. So you might have all this tourism activity happening.
Right.
But the jobs, the expertise that's needed, it's not always coming from the local population.
So the economic benefits are kind of watered down. Then if a lot of the workforce and the profits are going to people outside of the country. Yeah, it's not as effective as it could be. So what can be done about that?
Well, this is where policy interventions are really important.
Okay.
So government labor agencies and the diving industry itself, they need to work together to develop strategies for investing in skills training, making sure that the working conditions are safe and healthy, building the necessary infrastructure.
So creating a local workforce that's equipped to handle the industry.
Exactly, yeah, and making sure it's safe for them to do so.
That makes sense. It sounds like the local marine scientists and dive professionals should be right at the table when these policies are being developed.
Oh, absolutely. Their firsthand knowledge and experience is invaluable. I mean, they're the ones who are out there every day. They see the challenges firsthand.
Yeah, and they know what works and what doesn't. And thinking about all this, it makes me wonder, do the dive operators themselves have a role to play? Could they organize and kind of advocate for policies that support their businesses and local growth?
That's a really good point. And the research actually suggests that, establishing or strengthening scuba diving unions or similar associations could be a really good strategy. Because, a more organized industry can be a much more powerful force for positive change.
Right. They can speak with one voice.
Exactly.
So are there any examples, in the real world, where marine tourism has actually led to both conservation and economic gains for the local people?
Yeah, actually, there's a really great example in Mexico in a place called Cabo Pulmo National Park.
Oh, I've heard of that.
Yeah. So basically, the local community there, they stepped up to protect their coral reefs, which have been, pretty heavily damaged by overfishing. And they actually managed to create a marine protected area. And the results were amazing. The fish populations rebounded like crazy, and the local people started to see huge benefits from sustainable dive ecotourism. It's a great example of how conservation and local economies can work hand in hand.
Yeah, that's a really inspiring story.
It is, yeah. And it really highlights the core message from Zahida Afran-Nisa and her colleagues, which is that, for these island nations to really benefit from all this incredible beauty that they have underwater and the economic potential of the scuba diving industry, they have to be really strategic.
Okay.
They have to make sure that the policies are in place to ensure that more of that money stays within their borders. And it's not just about making money. It's about investing in their people, strengthening their infrastructure, and making sure that those marine ecosystems are healthy for the long term.
And it really all comes back to those sustainable development goals, doesn't it? A healthy local diving sector, it's not just about tourism dollars, it's about creating decent jobs, supporting sustainable growth, and protecting our oceans.
Yeah.
So to wrap things up, as you've been listening to this deep dive, thinking about this relationship between scuba diving, tourism, and these small island developing states, what kind of policies do you think would be most effective? What would really empower these nations to maximize the benefits of their incredible underwater worlds and make sure that their economies and their environments are both healthy for years to come? It's a big question, but it's one that's worth thinking about.
It is, yeah. It's about finding a way to balance the needs of the people with the needs of the planet. And it's a challenge, but it's one that we can overcome if we work together.
Absolutely. And with that, we want to thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive.
Yeah, thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.
Thanks for listening, and please subscribe to The Immersion Zone wherever you are listening to this or at www.theimmersionzone.com. Thanks. Dive safe.